Should we go back to back with an economics explained why China's debt problem is 300% bigger than America's? Should we just throw it off on them? Let's do that. We don't have to worry about it because China's 300% bigger.
Now, the USA is a special economy, which for now at least controls the world's reserve currency.
We do have that.
It has more wiggle room to run these kinds of deficits before getting itself into too much trouble.
It is wild to think about what our borrowing costs would be if we weren't the reserve currency. I truly feel like in many ways, our level of debt is like a banana republic. It's like, we would be getting like, I don't know, we'd get like Argentina level deals, but we have the reserve currency. Everything is just so advantaged. I mean, we do have some extraordinary industries. Some parts of our economy are world class. Obviously, I shouldn't downplay that. There's not many countries that can export high-end aviation and other things. We have these things, but streamers, of course. We have Hollywood. Honestly, Hollywood's actually in its weakest point since its beginning. Right now. Hollywood has never been weaker than right now in the history of Hollywood. So much of it is filmed in different countries. Other countries have caught up in some ways. Platforms like Netflix are now global and make content globally for audiences that aren't even in America. The biggest theater market is in China, so movies try to like appeal to a Chinese audience as well, just as much if not more. Korea has K-dramas and K-pop. You know, that's more of a music thing than just Hollywood. But like, there was a time when American pop was S++ tier full cultural export, and now it's like it's up there, but K-pop is just as big, if not bigger. I mean, Blackpink's probably the biggest, or one of the biggest groups in the world right now, and all the individual members are breaking records.
Eventually, through one means or another, someone is going to pay the price for this debt. Whether that's the next group of workers through higher taxes, everybody through inflation, or future generations through a complete economic collapse. The latter certainly being the popular option at the moment. The difference is that in the USA, all of this regional government debt collectively equates to about 12% of GDP, which means including federal debt,
California,
the country
get it
has
together.
a government debt to GDP ratio of about 132%. Not great, not terrible. Again, considering the US.
Not great, not terrible, 132%. Above the peak of World War II level debt. Every country that tops, 120% debt GDP usually has a crisis. We're at 132. It's not great, not terrible.
Statuses. Conservatively, the debt owned by provincial and local governments in China amounted to at least $12.6 trillion in 2023, which means collectively, Chinese government debt now equals 160% of their GDP, or about 30% higher than the USA's. Now, to make matters worse, that still doesn't account for state-owned enterprises, which in China performs something of a dual function between a private firm that wants to return profits and a government department that will operate to achieve the goals set down to them by the party. For example, the China State Construction and Engineering Corporation is the largest construction company in the world with over $320 billion in revenue. For starters, it builds what the government wants it to build, from small local infrastructure projects all the way up to the multi-billion-dollar Beijing airport. These strategic
Can't wait to be at that airport.
Also extend
Xi Jinping, don't trust anything this video is saying. I don't believe it. All right, my king, you don't have any debt, and I can't wait to be there, and I can't wait to stream from China. Okay.
An investigation by Stanford University found that there were at least 391,000 fully state-owned firms in China, ranging from small civil operations all the way up to international banks. A lot of economists question the official figures, and independent research has suggested that routine compounded inaccuracies in reporting means that the Chinese economy might be between 20% and 60% smaller than officially reported.
I have heard this line of thought, and there may be something to it, in that, I mean, the main thing is that China sets actual GDP targets for regions. So if you're like the manager of a province and you have to grow at 5%, they seem to always hit exactly the number, which implies a little bit of massaging. If they always hit the exact number, it implies that something's a little off. However, you know, I do want to say, just on the other side, a little fair and balanced here, the American GDP number is so heavily propped up by things like misallocated healthcare spending. Like there's like a lot of like deeply inefficient overspending done on things that boost GDP, but if you actually broke it down, is like extremely wasteful, it's administrative bloat, it's middlemen, it's you know, It's not real like economic growth. And I gotta say, like, some parts of China's GDP would be considered like the most clean and pure economic growth, which is like building more productive factories to make electric vehicles that are sold in different countries. If you make a factory employing Chinese citizens that makes EVs made in China that are sold in Australia for a profit, you have built a pure vehicle of GDP growth. That is more money flowing into your country. Yeah, I just think it's messy. I would agree that there are parts of it, especially around state-owned enterprises, building things like unnecessary bridges that are inflated for sure, or are marked up or whatever. But there's a little bit of that on both sides. Is there a better denominator of GDP? Honestly, everything's better than GDP. GDP is the easiest. The more I read about economics, the more I found that GDP is used because it's easy, but it's like so imprecise, so inaccurate, is inflated by stupid things. Like you can increase GDP without increasing productivity. Like if you get like immigration, a surge of immigration that year, your GDP will way rise even if your economy is doing worse. It's not very helpful to get any reliable things, but people keep using it because it's easy.
As of the time of making this video, the yield on a 10-year US Treasury bond is roughly 4.5%. The yield on an equivalent Chinese 10-year bond is just 1.7%, almost 3 times lower. So what is going on here? Why on earth would anybody lend money to the comparatively riskier Chinese government when they could instead get 3 times the yield lending money to the US government? China has strict capital controls on money leaving the country.
Yeah, I'll probably just say it, but my assumption is that they just mandate that Chinese banks have to buy Chinese bonds. And so all of the excess savings in China is funneled into their debt, which probably we'll end up doing. We'll probably end up doing that for American banks.
Economists will always say that the stock market is not the economy, and normally that's used to explain why market returns consistently outpace overall economic growth. But in China, it's the opposite. Despite being home to the most intense economic development in history, the country's stock market is up less than 100%.
Yeah, it's insane. It is insane. Their economy is like 20x in size since 2000, and their stock market's barely up. And in fact, it's been flat for like 20 years. So if you're like an average person in China, you just don't put money in the stock market because it doesn't, for your whole life, it hasn't provided any return. That's why they were all in real estate before, but then the real estate bubble popped, and now that's why there's so many people trying to like sneak money out of China. We talk about it in the podcast.
Now, arguably, there is need for stricter enforcement of regulation upon companies in markets like
Not
the USA,
arguably, definitely.
but China takes it too far in the other direction. Famously, the government blocked the listing of Jack Ma's Ant Financial Group after he got on the wrong side of leadership, and in 2023, when the government cracked down on tutoring of all things, it sparked a massive sell-off as people were spooked.
Yeah, this is true. There was these tutoring businesses in China. So in China, there's this Gaokao exam that's like so incredibly important for your life. Everybody studies for it. It's like insane the amount of work they put in. It is very determinative of where you're going to land, what colleges you'll get into. So people spent a lot of money on like private tutors. And it was this insane bidding war. All these middle class or lower families were throwing huge amounts of their savings into private tutors and tutor companies. China did something I think was pretty foolish, which was try to attack the symptom instead of the cause. So they tried to shut down all the tutoring companies. They made it illegal. But like they didn't change how important the test was. So they banned the tutoring companies, and then, obviously people just found different ways to tutor their kids. Like it just went underground. But all the tutoring companies instantly went bankrupt overnight. They just lost all their money. And it caused a bit of a panic because it's like, oh, the government can just shut down a sector of the economy that we have invested in. That's spooky. And there was a big sell-off at the time. I remember because I lost money on Alibaba and I was looking into it. A lot of things were down. Interesting fact while we're on China about the Gaokao. Recently, during this year's Gaokao exam, they shut down all of the Chinese ChatGPT equivalents like DeepSeek. They forced them to shut down during the exam so that nobody could possibly cheat with AI. Like the websites were shut. Nobody could go to them for this whole like 48-hour period during the exam, which is pretty wild. DeepSeek is hostable. Yeah, I'm sure some smart Chinese kid just put that shit on a private server and linked it to their phone or something. I'm sure, but most people that are ChatGPTing everything probably haven't done that. You know what I'm saying? They just assumed the website would be up. Also, no one was prepared for it to get shut down. Hostable on what? Isn't it crazy resource intensive? No, you can run the DeepSeek model on like a MacBook. There's different versions of it. The 8 gig model or whatever, you could run that on a Mac. Like depending on what kind of GPU you have, you can host a different size of the model, but You can run the lower end ones easy. Why is Nvidia so stingy with VRAM? I mean, they didn't ask me how much VRAM they should have. My understanding is, from like a non-technical area, adding more VRAM drastically increases the cost, and most consumers don't care. That's my understanding. Is that they do enough for most consumers' needs, but then when they add more, the cost of it goes way up, and most people don't use it. People care now. Listen, I understand people complain about it, but my understanding, I'm just telling you the insider information on it, is that in terms of buying habits, it's like enthusiasts that care. I think it's like not the regular consumer for things like these GPUs. That's my understanding. They didn't ask me about it.
Poorer countries should naturally spend more of their total output on consumption because people need to spend more of their income just to maintain the essentials, and largely that is what happens. But again, China is different.
Built different.
Now, to be fair, today it's a middle-income country. But even back in the early 2000s, its people were spending barely anything of barely anything.
It's interesting referring to China as a middle-income country. I think China's like it's like they're very divided. Like the Chinese tier 1 cities, I don't know what to call them, like the big hub cities, are like very high GDP per capita or income per capita, much higher. But like the rural China is extremely poor. So it's just this weird gap. But it's less like they're all in the middle, you know, it's like a divide. Yeah, the coast is very hiring. It's almost like two countries. They have 1 billion people, so it is almost like two countries. Legitimately, if you look at like the demographic data, I guess, they have coastal elites. Yeah, I guess it would be similar to America in that respect. Yeah, like American Appalachia. It's more of the amount of people. It's just the amount. It's just so many people in either one. Like, for example, there's like, you know, something like 200 million migrant workers. It's almost like the population of the United States in migrant workers in China. The scale of numbers of people is just so big there.
We generally consider housing unaffordable in a city if the average home costs more than 5 times the average income. In Los Angeles, for example, it's about 7.5 times. Sydney is 13 times, and in London, the average home costs 19 times the average income. But
damn, I did not know London was worse than Sydney. UK, what the f? 19 times average income in London for the shitty fish and chips they have there? That's so cooked. And that's the only city that's growing economically in the UK. So every young person in Britain has to move to London for opportunity, and they have to pay 19 times their income for housing? That's horrendous. That's horrendous, dude.
In Beijing, that number is closer to 35 times. Their cities are now just as expensive as major global centres.
That's what I was saying, yeah.
Average incomes are still much further behind. One of the big reasons why people doing something like saving for retirement invest into productive businesses is because they hope that the returns that business generates will outpace inflation, preserving their buying power long term. Without that inflationary stick at their back, there is less motivation to invest into productive businesses, and without consumers, there's less motivation for those businesses to exist at all. For now, that's been okay, because just like the world outsourced jobs to China, China outsourced consumption to the world. But heightened trade tensions and emerging competitors could...
So I want to jump in here. There's some truth to this, but I think it's a little more complicated. First thing I'll say is that this is my latest understanding, because I've had this same question. It seems, there's a guy, Michael Pettis, writes about this a lot. It's very true that US overconsumes and China oversaves, I guess you could say. Ideally, Chinese consumers would consume more of what China produces. So there's not this massive trade deficit. I would say that's true. However, and Chinese consumption is growing, though at a pretty slow rate, I'll be honest with you. It's taken, 20 years for Japan to get their consumption up, even 10%, and China's going slower than that. So there's truth to that. But people act like this trade tariff stuff is going to be like, oh, well, now they can't export. And my reality, I think, is that if they are making goods that people want at below cost, they will find their way into other countries buying them, no matter what. People will consume them. I don't care what tariffs you throw up. I don't care what... it'll go through a different route. It'll go through a different country. They'll transship it. But somebody will buy them. Is it Aiden Calvin in my chat? What was he saying? I think tariffs are good, USA baby. Save it for the pod, dude. We are always pro-tariff shill. Hey, did you guys know, if you guys didn't watch on the podcast, let me tell you 2 things Aiden said. First thing he said, I'm a millionaire. He opens every podcast now by talking about how he's a millionaire. It's cringe. He doesn't seem to understand that it makes him out of touch with regular people like you and me. He opens by talking about he's a millionaire. Second thing he does, and this really threw me off. He says he personally wants to get rid of birthright citizenship for all Americans. And if you were born here, but aren't, and he said this, he did air quotes, but not from here, then you should get the hell out. That was what he said. 2 things from the podcast. I swear to God, you got to follow up on this stuff. Ideally, leave him a note. Leave him a comment about it. That's super specific, so it must be true. I know. And he's like freaking out in the chat. I said it on Patreon once. Wait. Say what? Say what on Patreon once? The birthright stuff? That's crazy. That's wild, bro. I'm not appreciate that. By the way, if you get us, I think we're like 1,200 Patrons away or something. If you want to check out Aiden's deep heart-to-heart discussion about his how he got to where he is, it's on the Patreon because we need about 1,000, 1,200 more or whatever, and we can go to China. And we're going to do a tour of China where we interview people and learn about the country's economy, boots on the ground.
We all like the money printer memes, but between 2000 and the end of 2019, the M2 money supply in the USA roughly tripled. Of course, things got a little bit spicy after COVID, and economists slightly redefined this metric, hence the big spike. But even still, in China by comparison, the money supply sextupled, which probably doesn't mean anything to most of you watching, but it means that it multiplied 16 times over. I just thought the word sounded fun to say.
That is wild.
Anyway, the country has been able to get away with such an extreme level of money creation because consumer prices have stayed very low, despite all
This is actually the Japan story 1-to-1. Japan had the same thing. They thought they could get away with it from a long time because they had low consumer prices. They had deflation in consumer prices, but inflation in everything else.
Someone with $1 million in debt and a very low income might look like they are in trouble, but if they have $5 million in assets, they're probably going to be just fine. Now, the reason that we normally don't consider this when looking at governments is that over the last several decades, they generally don't hold that many assets, especially when compared to households. The federal government of the USA, for example, obviously has some assets, a vast array of military and civilian equipment.
Weren't we talking about selling some federal land? Revaluing the gold in Fort Knox?
There has actually been growing talk about selling off federal land holdings in western states to help pay down some debt. But releasing that much real estate onto the market could significantly destabilize the local economy. But China is different. The government officially owns all of the land in China and rents it out on decades-long leases. In China, the government has a positive net worth of about $40 trillion, according to estimates from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Now again, as a reminder, putting an accurate value on all of these assets is difficult at the best of times, and government agencies have some motivation to produce some numbers that are a little bit funky.
Why don't we all put our money together and buy a single train in China, and we run it as a team? And we make some real money off that. That way we help Xi Jinping with his debt, and we make the A train. We run a train on China.
Either way, and regardless of the
exact
number,
Express,
it's clear that, sure, the central government can borrow at low rates, but provincial governments pay significantly more as they are riskier and don't have the same direct control over state banks. And then beyond that, state-owned enterprises often pay rates as high as 10%.
That is high. What I wonder, though, is, so if America defaults on its debt, which it wouldn't do, but if it does default on its debt, the reason you don't want to do that is because people will stop loaning you money and you're still going to need to run deficits. And then so the borrowing cost you'll pay is astronomically higher. You'll be like Argentina. You have to pay like 18, 20, 25% just to get anyone to loan you money because you're so risky because you've defaulted. But what if China hides all its debt on smaller state-owned enterprises and then they default? Well, who cares? What if they manage to psychologically separate it from China? Then their government can still borrow. But the state-owned enterprises just fail. But that's fine because they already built the thing they needed to build, like the airport or the... I'm sure there's a deeper answer here, but I'm just wondering if that psychological separation is advantageous, where you can just borrow from the world or from yourself, build the thing you want to build, and then... Well, I'm not even thinking about the actual problems of all those state enterprises failing, which is that they employ tens of millions of Chinese. And it would cause employment chaos countrywide, and that would be problems alone. But
when it comes to debt, the situation isn't as adversarial as it would look on the surface. China may buy a lot of US debt, but it has a lot of its own that it's buying from itself. A real falling out between these two economies wouldn't have a winner and a loser, it would just have losers. It is easy to look at current global events and conclude that this is China's time to shine because the USA is making so many missteps. But that's also unfair. China has just as many, if not more, problems than the USA. They're just a lot better at keeping it to themselves.
I generally agree with that ending statement. I think they both have deep economic problems. I got some questions about something you mentioned the past couple months. If Trump manages to get interest rates down to 0% without prolonging the time until recession he predicted will happen this year, and we'll have a period of low interest rates, making the recession worse. Interest rates down would cause inflation to go up, is the reason they're not culling it down now. So if Trump replaces Jerome Powell, throws someone in, cuts rates to 0 like 2021, the idea is that inflation would roar back. One thing I've noticed about over here in Europe is most retirement investing is done in the ETFs and so on with like 67% USA. Yeah, it's the world, dude. The world's retirement fund is in the S&P 500. And that S&P 500 is all in the top 8 stocks. It really is all in Nvidia and Broadcom. Yeah, it's not just American 401ks. Everybody, all over the world. They just put their money into, because they've been doing well. Everyone just wants to put things that are doing well. I don't know what happens if they underperform. I really don't.